Greetings Guardians, my name is Bife here. Short version of a later update that I'll talk about in a different video. I took a month out to deal with some pretty serious burnout. More content across other games will be rolling out starting, well, soon. And I'll be talking more about all that soon, and some other content I'll be making on Destiny. But today, I wanted to get back into the swing of things with what might be a somewhat easier video with familiar ground. And we're going to talk about the finished story of Revenant. To clarify, this is not a video commentating on the state of the game. That is a separate video that I'll make at some point later this week. The short version of that video is, it's not looking good, but that's nothing you needed me to tell you. It's something which is resoundingly being said throughout the community right now. I know that there are a lot of people in my audience, however, who just want to know about what happened so that they can keep up to date. So that's the video we'll be doing today. I'm saving the commentary on the state of the game generally for that other video, and commentary on this story will be at the very end, so if you just want the update, stay tuned. It'll be in the latter half that you want to skip if you're not here for doom and gloom. Which is understandable, because if you just want to get your update and just want to enjoy something, that's perfectly reasonable. For those of you who do want my thoughts, you get a bit of that at the very end. For the really quick summary, Act 3 revolves around the exotic mission, the storming of Fikrul's fortress, and the question of who would eventually become the Kell of Kells and who would claim the Echo. It's got a lot of weird dynamics to it. In the previous part of the episode, in Act 2, Eido and Crow freed Aramis from custody in order to allow her to assist in the hunt for Fikrul. We just found out that Fikrul had raised Skolas, the Kell of the House of Wolves, who had once claimed to be the Kell of Kells. He was now Fikrul's champion of sorts. With Skolas at his side, Fikrul was trying to make a claim for the mythological Kell of Kells title. A mythical prophecy of the House of Rain spelled out that the Traveler itself would choose a Kell of Kells, a sort of prophetic leader that would lead all of the Eliksni people. With Skolas as his champion, Fikrul's claim to this legendary title was substantial, and he planned on actually using it to unite all of the Eliksni and turn them all into scorn. We also learned of the song within the Echo, a voice which was singing a dirge of Old Reese, a voice which was supposedly of Old Reese itself, the Eliksni homeworld. This voice was looking for a new bearer for the Echo, one that was worthy of its power, unlike Fikrul, who was simply looking to defile the Eliksni people. This finally leads us to the starting point of Act 3 proper. In Act 3, we discovered Fikrul's fortress far off in the Tangled Shore's edges, and went there in a series of excursions. This old awoken watchtower had been converted into Fikrul's lair, and showcased how far his mastery of the Echo had really gone. Before embarking upon our first expedition, Eido gave us a frame for a shotgun that would turn into the Slayer's Fang, an exotic which would harness power from Fikrul's fortress. Throughout the castle, there were mirrors that were illuminated by terrifying cracks. When these fragile gateways of refracted light had been destroyed or fractured by weapons fire, they would create a gateway into an alternate, refracted dimension which had been created by the Echo, a mirror dimension of sorts. Everything was backwards. These would eventually empower Eido's shotgun frame and demonstrated Fikrul's mastery of the Echo, as it was a place of both light and darkness, much like the Echo itself. It bordered on our reality and contained the revenant essence required to destroy the more powerful Scorn within the fortress. Speaking of which, the Fanatic was keen to ensure that there were powerful opponents that would face us in battle, and so began to resurrect a great number of the old Scorn that we had once slain. The Mad Bomber, Canucks Two Fingers, the Trickster, Araskes, the Mindbender, Hyrax, and the Hangman, Rexis Varn, were all risen again to fight over the course of our expeditions into the castle. But at first, when we reached Fikrul's throne room, it was clear that there was no way of actually damaging him. But it seemed that there might finally be an answer to this problem thanks to Eido's tonics. Fikrul, for those of you who've forgotten, is functionally immortal, a Scorn that has been created via wish magic and someone who will simply resurrect over and over again after death. It's actually part of the canon reason why the Hollowed Lair was one of the few strikes we could run on repeat over and over and over again. Ido had been looking into the old tonics of Rhys with the intent of curing her father of his ailment, where he was persistently being haunted by the spirit of Nezarec. So far, she had done so to little avail, but she had learned things about the fundamental relationship between the Scorn and the Eliksni, thanks to Eramis. In particular, she learned that this relationship was defined by their ether. To put it simply, Eliksni have normal ether, but with the Echo's power, that ether could be infused with darkness and turn into dark ether, which in turn would make the Eliksni Scorn instead. The Echo is also presumably what allowed Fikrul to do this instantaneously, creating the new Revenant Scorn instead of the old means by which he created them, which required the Eliksni to die first. Ido theorized that there was a tonic she could create that would essentially do what the Echo had done in reverse. The tonic, if ingested into Fikrul, would turn his dark ether into normal ether, rendering him mortal momentarily, and also momentarily turning him back into an Eliksni. In this moment, we would have to strike. Creating this tonic would not be easy, and required assistance from Eramis and from one whose knowledge of old Rhys was even more ancient than hers, and whose mastery of tonics was truly something artful. Luckily, Eramis knew of one such individual in Scorn custody, Ixis the Apothecary. Ixis was being held by Fikrul beneath his throne room, and whilst she wasn't willing to work alongside humanity, Eramis and Ido's presence was enough to sway her to assist the Eliksni generally. Ixis would assist Ido with creating her tonic, with the knowledge that Fikrul would probably keep her alive for the time being, as the transformation from an Eliksni to a Scorn would remove all of her great accumulated wealth of knowledge. Ixis also stated that she actually preferred to live with the Scorn rather than join humanity and the House of Light in the Last City. That goes to show how little some Eliksni still think of humanity. With Ido's tonic crafted and with a special injector device made to deliver it into Fikrul's heart directly, we had a chance to unseat this would-be Kell of Kells at last. But this left a single issue in its wake. The next would-be Kell of Kells, Mithrax, who was not entirely himself. He had become more and more unstable as time was progressing. His body and soul were clearly being possessed by Nezarec, and the affliction that had been presented by the curse of Nezarec was growing greater with each passing day. For those of you who forgot, back in the season of the Plunder, this is something that is in fact not well explained, but it is noted that Nezarec's curse was transferred to Mithrax in the moment when he distilled that darkness from the relics that we collected over that season. This allowed for that infusion that healed Osiris, the fabled Nez Cafe, but the actual Nezarec part of the relic's darkness was infused into Mithrax's soul, leaving him with this really gnarly affliction. By this point that we were raiding the fortress of Fikrul, Mithrax was only with us half the time, and was not always lucid. When he wasn't present, Nezarec was, and in those moments Nezarec spoke with a darker tone in Mithrax's voice, openly proclaiming the pain that he would leave the Eliksni in when he began his terrible rule through Mithrax. When Mithrax did regain consciousness briefly, he asked us to protect the Eliksni from him if the corruption truly took hold of him in an irrevocable way. As Mithrax put it, he would not defeat Fikrul, only to become him. When we did enact our final assault, we did manage to defeat the fanatic. When his dark ether turned into normal ether, when Fikrul passed back from Scorn to Eliksni, and when he faded from this mortal coil, his final words were simply, "Who will care for my children?" But as the fanatic fell, his scepter began to hover. It was directly between two contestants for the greatness of its power. Mithrax and Eramis were both present. and both of them lunged for the Echo. In a blinding flash of light, it made a choice. We were transported alongside Eramis to a vision showing something of old Reese in its glory days, from the age of heroes, as Eramis put it. The Echo of Reese had chosen her to be its bearer, and apparently it wanted her to be the one that would bear it forth and rebuild the Eliksni homeworld. When the vision ended, Eramis faced down Nezarec. The scepter was in her hand. The overwhelming presence of the final god of pain that was still residing within Mithrax surged within the Kell of light, and he made a move for the scepter that was firmly within Eramis's grasp. As he lunged, Eramis reacted. She could have simply left in that moment, but instead, using the combined light and darkness of the Echo, Eramis purged Nezarec's presence from Mithrax and saved his life. With the Echo having been claimed and Fikrul having been defeated, Eramis and Mithrax took their places as the bearers of the Echo and the Kell of Kells, respectively. The two would have separate responsibilities to the Eliksni people, and the Kell of Kells would not be the one to bear the Echo after all. Eramis departed the system with one of her ketches, leaving behind her role as the Kell of the House of Salvation forever. She went to rebuild a home for the Eliksni, with the Echo in hand and a ketch at her back. Mithrax, Spider, Varix, and Ido were left to rebuild the Eliksni people in Sol under the House of Light, with the Kell of Kells as their leader. Crow was able to put the greatest shame of Uldren's past to rest, after having finally conquered the Fanatic and having put Fikrul to rest. So, that's what happened in Revenant Act 3. So, what are my thoughts? If you were just looking for the recap, it's probably time to switch off. Before I start, I want to say that I'm coming back to this after having taken a long break. You'll have noticed that for about a month or so there's been very little content on the channel, with the exception of a few T-Slapes. Yeah, I burnt out hard and I needed time away from everything generally. The Dragon Age project really burned me out. I do, however, recommend doing this generally because games are for playing and for fun, and if you aren't enjoying a game, you shouldn't have to treat it like a chore, so yet again I will remind everyone that it's okay to take a break and come back to a game when you enjoy it. That point aside though, I am looking at Revenant's story with a fresher set of eyes, and have taken time out, and I still have to say, some of the narrative choices here are baffling. It feels kind of all over the place. I do think that a lot of people looked at Eramis's side of the story within this episode and just did not like it. It's very much not an objective point because this is very much an opinion-based thing, but I think it's fair to say that a bunch of people within the community have the opinion that Eramis did not deserve a redemption arc. This is based purely on the fact that she shows very little contrition whenever we interact with her, and also because I think, well, a lot of people are actually really tired of everyone having a redemption arc in Destiny. There is this persistent idea that everyone can be redeemed, and honestly, no, I don't think that's what the community wants. It feels very naive and optimistic to think that everyone can indeed turn out to be a good guy. I have to also say, and this is not an Act 3 commentary bit, it's more of an Act 2 one, but Ido's plan again of freeing her? Very out of left field, and even with her good faith in people, it came across as way too naive. In fact, I'd go as far as to say it's out of character for her. It felt very forced as a result. That's my perspective, but let me explain it. People often see Ido as someone who is naive, and a lot of the writing tries to portray her as naive. However, there is also a very fine point to that, because the naivety is just how you look at it through the opening lens. Ido is the scribe of the House of Light. She is clearly an intelligent person. However, she doesn't see it as naivety, and oftentimes it's proven that she simply sees the potential good in people, the best in people. And that's what she's really doing. Oftentimes, when she puts trust in someone, it's because she understands that they have a good chance of turning and becoming something better for the sake of everyone involved. However, that doesn't square with what's being done here. Back in the Season of Defiance, Eramis did save Mithrax. There is some good in her, but after having done that, you know what she said to him? "We're even now." And then she just leaves. She is out. She does nothing more for the rest of her time. She basically abandons the entire pursuit of anything to do with the Darkness and the Witness. She is effectively a non-factor in that story, and when she's captured again at the beginning of Revenant, she's kind of out for everyone's blood. She does not care. She just basically wants nothing to do with any of these people, and is willing to call us all effectively enemies. The only thing that is redeeming about her is the fact that she's uniting with us in order to stop the Scorn, but at no point is that properly emphasized, and it certainly isn't emphasized enough by Ido, who, if she is looking to go ahead and free Eramis for good reasons, would cling to this point immediately and would fight for it wholeheartedly. More importantly, it would be something she would need to convince us of, quite clearly, and not in some side note where she gets mistaken for naivety, but with the actual intelligence that she clearly has. It's one of those things where I'm sure it's just down to the way that things were written, but this just did not sit right with me generally. I think this does Ido poorly. I think that she would have been able to do this in a much better manner. I think she should have been able to actually convince Crow, actually convince all the other members of her house. Maybe only have Mithrax in his Nezarec-esque state shout her down, and have people realize that, yeah, this is actually a good idea if the malefactor is someone who's saying it wrong. I'd also have had Eramis been a little different here, to give her the possibility of actually showing contrition. Like, there's a line where it's mentioned that as part of her prison sentence, the Vanguard offered her a therapist. And again, I brought this up previously, but crazy and perhaps as predictable as that might have ended up being, I can imagine a different storyline where she'd at least have contemplated it or even said yes. And you know, that might have changed things. Maybe it would have been better also if the actual song that everyone could hear from the Echo in Act 2 spoke specifically to Eramis. After all, she does end up claiming it. So, yeah, I don't know, there just wasn't enough give and enough take on either side of that plan to make it feel... it just didn't feel right. Also, this is not at all a structural point, it's just kind of funny. When you do start Act 3, Eramis is back in jail. So, yeah, okay. Moving on though, let's talk about the Apothecary. This was dropped into the story very much at the last minute, and it solves what is honestly one of Destiny's longest running problems, which is Fikrul's immortality. It's kind of the sort of strange get-out-of-jail-free card that Fikrul has always had, and I feel like the emphasis on Fikrul's immortality needed to kind of be more emphasized. The fact that he is immortal is the major problem with him doing all of this stuff, but it's not really approached at first. It's something that's just left in the background as an unstated bit that we just needed to solve at some point. And I feel like that should have been more of a focus, you know? It's kind of weird to then see the Apothecary appear out of nowhere as an answer to this in just a few lines of dialogue. And she's not really developed much as a character outside of the few lines of dialogue which we see. I would also have loved to see an actual character here, not just a door that doesn't open. With that being said, I haven't played through enough versions of the Exotic Mission. I've just completed Act 3's story, so maybe you do see someone. I don't know. It's a big open question there. I will sit there and say too that the way that Revenant has been deconstructed for the sake of the experiment, which we'll talk about in a bit, yeah, it's really not helped the Apothecary story here, because there are lines that feel like they appear out of order for all of this. People are talking about the Apothecary as though we know about her before she's actually introduced in dialogue, which ends up just being very weird and baffling, and it just doesn't make much sense. It's fine, but it is very much a, oh, this introduces it and solves the biggest issue of the entire thing very much at the last minute, which is frustrating too, because this has kind of been Fikrul's deal. Killing the fanatic who is immortal is kind of a big problem. Anyway, there are other things, and I think the biggest thing that stems from all of this as a problem is the way that the experiment ended up going. I have better hopes for Heresy when it comes to this because there was more time to actually do things, and it's not quite the same as what's going on with Revenant, I'm sure. That being said, I'm ready to be proven wrong on that, and I say that partly because, well, while the experiment that was made with regards to how to do seasonal story was followed through with good faith and goodwill, and whilst it is more respectful of people's time, I think that Revenant's leg of the experiment with the story structure that Revenant had has clearly failed. Maybe all this proves is that for this 3-act structure where everything is dropped all at once, you need to have content that's built bespoke with that in mind, as opposed to content that's cut back down into something which fits into that time slot. I don't know. Maybe all of this is going to be changed in Heresy, but honestly, this does not work. In particular, I think this episode and this act, it revealed itself with the constant running back and forth to receive different people's voice calls, where realistically this could all have been one conversation. At one point, I spoke to Ido within her tonic laboratory, only to go over to the terminal next to me and talk to her again. Like, what? I mean, yeah, clearly this is the result of the experiment and the fact that they had to cut these things down. It seems clear that all of this was designed with an activity between these things, and the narrative had to be delivered in this time, and there was no time to actually change any of it. However, this is why I'm holding out for Heresy on these particular ones, because this feels like it's only proved that Revenant's major story, which was clearly meant to take place over weeks, much like the old stuff, does not fit with the whole theme of crushing it all together into one. If you're going to make a content model, again, this just proves that you should make it bespoke for that content model. So we'll see. I don't know how this goes, but yeah, that's the big learning of the experiment thus far. If it is continued for Heresy, hopefully it will be better because it is built bespoke, but again, we'll have to see. The community's consensus seems to have flipped back firmly in the other direction. Whilst old me is somewhat vindicated for that, I will sit there and say that it does not fix the bigger problem generally, which is that the narrative structure should be made to surprise and delight and should not be the same structure over and over again. Different structures for different stories and ever-evolving structures for an ever-evolving world, I think, needs to be the kind of modus operandi for this going forward. Again, that's a lot of backseat dev talk. I don't know what really works best. We had the seasonal structure for a long time and it worked for a long time. Maybe there is some truth to that, and maybe we're all just very fatigued and tired by it. Finally, Mithrax is the Kell of Kells now, but I feel like that story beat was finished in a rather underwhelming way because he's Kell of Kells by default, because he's the last Kell standing. The prophecy of the Kell of Kells is a big thing within Eliksni mythology and lore. It's something where the Traveler itself is supposed to have chosen this Kell, where all Ketches and all servitors will bow before them. Eramis chose to spare him. The only thing that came close to choosing Mithrax was the beam of light that came from the Echo. This is not the Traveler choosing him. This is a part of the Traveler and a part of the Witness, whatever's left over in that Echo, choosing to spare him. And that's only the best interpretation of it, because realistically the Echo is a tool that in the moment was used by Eramis. The Traveler did not choose Mithrax, and it feels therefore like the myth is kind of invalidated. Like, I mean, the whole point of the entire thing of Fikrul claiming this myth and him being seen as illegitimate was partly because of the fact that he was trying to claim it by wiping all the other options out. It's based on the idea that no, the Traveler didn't choose him, he's choosing himself through tyranny. And Mithrax has unwittingly picked up that same baton. You know, this would have been one of those moments where I would have loved to see the Traveler actually do something. You know, this silent god that once again does nothing. Yeah, it makes sense that there was one extraordinary act which it's actually moved for, and that's Cayde sacrificing himself to bring back our ghost. But I would have loved to have actually seen this pan out, you know? Have the Echo make a petition to the Traveler as a part of it. I don't know, the what-if situation for this is going to be discussed to death, but in my mind this really doesn't do the Kell of Kells storyline justice. Eramis just chose to spare him, he wasn't chosen by the Traveler, and now he's Kell of Kells by default. It kind of devalues the entire mythology around it, and I feel like more could have been done with what's been built up by House Rain. There are some other things to mention here, but all of them are relatively unimportant in the big picture of things. These are things like enemies and bosses being repeated, and whilst this is absolutely a narrative critique, it is a gameplay issue too, and I think it's something that is not as pressing as all the other things that have brought us here. I think that you can indeed do repeated enemies in a tasteful, even fun, even exciting way, but I don't think it's done here in Revenant. It kind of feels like it's, well, just done by default. I mean, hell, when Savathûn got resurrected inside of Season of the Witch, actually a really cool moment. I know that we all have bad memories of that because of the layoffs and the way that the community felt about all that at the time being, but legitimately, it was a very cool moment. And, well, the Hangman and all the Scorn Barons being brought back one more time, well, it just doesn't have that same oomph. What I will say, though, is that this isn't to say that Bungie's team can't develop new enemies. I mean, take a look at all the Dread, for example. And more to the point in this exotic mission, take a look at the Screeb Broodmother. That's a horrifying cool concept that combines two enemies. I love the idea, it's terrifying, and it brings back the vaunted mini-Screeb. Ugh, nasty. But all of it is to say that, yeah, I think that Bungie can firmly design new combatants and enemies. It's just a case of maybe rebalancing how much that's done, and also potentially looking at where that is in the list of priorities. I imagine that it's not easy, considering that the Dread took however many years to actually materialize. Individual new combatants are possible, but I think it's all about finding the variety of space and how those things mechanically interact with this sandbox and the rest of what we're doing that really matters here. I also imagine that there's a big point of enemy redundancy. What I mean by that is that if they don't design enemies that are meaningfully different enough, then they might as well have not designed them at all. I imagine that it's tricky to design different kinds of enemies that do different things, that meaningfully alter the sandbox. Now, that's just me trying to sit there and look into what the game design problem might be. I'm not a game dev, so I don't know. Regardless, I don't think that's the biggest issue plaguing the game right now. I think the stuff that I mentioned earlier is all episode specific. I think there are bigger issues on the horizon, which I'll talk about in another video. So, did the episode's story do anything good? Well, yeah, absolutely. There were definitely things to enjoy about it. The expansion of the lore around Rhys and the Eliksni was a really nice thing to touch on, especially seeing as Aramis is now likely returning there or creating a new version of Rhys in the future. It's awesome to see the Garden Way lore book in particular, which again, I need to cover, but I burned out before I could. I have the entire thing ready to go in a script, I just need to get some other stuff out of the way first. I also think it's really nice to see a plot point tied off for a change. A lot of the time Destiny leaves these hanging plot threads, and it is good to finally see something tied off. I do, however, stand by the fact that it would have been nicer to see all these threads tied a little better. Eramis leaving to go ahead and rebuild Rhys is somewhat sullied by the fact that a lot of people don't believe she deserved a redemption arc. Subjective, but ultimately, that's fine and that's to everyone's own opinion. I've talked already about why I think Mithrax as the Kell of Kells hasn't landed quite well, and I've also talked about how the Apothecary being the linchpin of Fikrul's defeat is also not perfect, but regardless, I do think it's good that we're actually tying off plot points. That was the objective of this episode, and they seem to have done that for sure. The Scorn are probably still around to be manipulated, once again by some other great enemy, but the Fanatic is finally dead, which is nice because we so rarely see a final enemy death. I mean, look at Eramis in Beyond Light. You know, she froze up and that was all dramatic, and then she just came back later in Season of the Plunder. The spaces built for this episode might be panned as a reskin by some, but honestly, I love the vibe, especially for the exotic mission. If it's aiming for this creepy, haunted Castlevania vibe, it hits that stuff in a very clearly Destiny fashion, and it hits it 10 out of 10. The aesthetic of Destiny has almost always been fantastic, and it has to be said, the organ is a really cool touch. It's not the horror show that was Presage, but it's still really effective for what it's going for. And despite the fact that it is conceptually just an even more inverted version of Duality's Nightmare Realm, I do think that the mirror dimension for this exotic mission is pretty cool, even if it's only distinct by its aesthetic and the puzzles that you do with the exotic within it. Whilst I do wish we had seen more of him in the episode, I did enjoy Nezarek's presence, though it is a thing that leaves me hoping desperately for more, because Nezarek conceptually is an awesome presence within Destiny's universe. The way that his character is presented isn't always enough to give him the on-screen malice that I think his lore has been given and deserves. The way that he gets defeated at the end of the episode is actually pretty fitting too. It's one of my favourite parts about the entire thing, and not just because it's a really cool cutscene. It's the specific energies that defeat him, a combination of the energies of light and dark, which harkens back to the raid. Yes, this is very much one of those moments where Root of Nightmares showed us that in order to defeat Nezarek in the final boss fight, you needed the presence of both light and dark energy. And lo and behold, the Echo is what defeated Nezarek, a combination of the light and the dark. Very neat. Very well done. I love the symmetry there. But all of these good points aside, don't change the reality that there's something wrong with Destiny as a whole right now. I'll be talking more about it again in the next video on the state of Destiny. The short version is that we're all inevitably going to be thinking the exact same thing right now, which is that Destiny has effectively endgamed itself. Digging out of this hole is a totally different order now, and the reality has started to set in. Either way, that's where we are, and that's where we'll be leaving things for now. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, go ahead and leave a like, and if you want more content, I am returning now after having taken quite the hiatus, so I will be back with more. In the meantime though, if you did enjoy the video and if you want more lore from worlds both near and far, go ahead and hit subscribe and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. We are approaching the weird number of 1.1 million. Strange to sit there and see that happening, but it would be nice to continue growing even after all this time. That being said, know that as per usual, your viewership as always is quite enough for me, and that in the meantime, my name is Byf. Audacia Arastra. I'll see you, Starside.